The text message glowed on my phone screen like a sinister warning. We need to talk about what happened in Denver. Meet me at Cafe Luna, 3 p.m. My hands trembled as I read it again. Louis, my brother-in-law, had finally played his card. I'm Willow, and until last week, I thought I'd buried my past deep enough that it would never resurface. But here I was, sitting across from Louis at a corner table, watching him stir his untouched coffee with calculated precision. You know, Willow, he said, his voice eerily calm. When I started looking into your background for the family business merger, I never expected to find something this interesting. He slid his phone across the table, displaying a news article from 8 years ago. My throat went dry. That case was sealed. Nothing's ever really sealed these days, is it? Louis smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Imagine how devastated Olive would be if she knew her perfect little sister was involved in corporate espionage. That's not what happened, and you know it. I kept my voice steady, though my heart was racing. I was cleared of all charges. But the scandal alone would destroy you, your reputation, your marriage to Santiago, your position at the company. He leaned forward. Unless, of course, we can come to an arrangement. I gripped my coffee cup tighter. What do you want, Louis? For now, just your support at the next board meeting. Vote against the audit proposal. The audit your wife, my sister, requested. I shook my head. Olive suspects something's wrong with the books. She's not stupid. No, but she's trusting. Too trusting. Louis checked his watch. You have until Friday to decide. Otherwise, everyone learns about Denver. After he left, I sat there for another hour, my coffee growing cold. My phone buzzed with a text from Haley. Still on for dinner tonight? I needed my best friend more than ever. Can we make it my place? Need to talk. Later that evening, I paced my kitchen while Haley listened to the whole story. The wine in her glass remained untouched, a first in our 15 years of friendship. That manipulative bastard, she finally said. Have you told Santiago? I can't. I stopped pacing. The Denver incident, it's complicated. I was young, desperate, and made a terrible mistake. The charges were dropped because I helped expose a bigger fraud, but the damage was done. Santiago believes in me so completely. If he knew. Hey. Haley stood up and grabbed my shoulders. Stop. You were cleared. You did the right thing in the end. That's what matters. Try explaining that to Olive. She idolizes Louis. I pulled away and leaned against the counter. You should see how she looks at him, Haley. Like he hung the moon. Meanwhile, he's asking me to help him hide something from her. My phone buzzed again. Olive's name flashed on the screen. Family dinner Sunday. Dad's asking for everyone to come. Says he has news. Perfect timing, I muttered, showing Haley the message. You have to tell them about Louis, Haley insisted. And risk losing my sister forever. You know how she gets. Remember the Christmas incident? When she didn't speak to Mara for 6 months because she suggested Louis might be flirting with the neighbor. Haley shook her head. Your sister needs to wake up. The doorbell rang, making us both jump. It was Santiago, home early from his business trip. I quickly wiped my eyes as he walked in. Ladies' night, he asked, kissing my cheek. Hope I'm not interrupting. Actually, I was just leaving, Haley said, gathering her things. At the door, she hugged me tight and whispered, call me tomorrow, we'll figure this out. That night, lying beside Santiago, I stared at the ceiling fan spinning above us. His steady breathing usually calmed me, but not tonight. My phone lit up with another message from Louis. Tick-tock. I turned away from the light, my mind racing. Louis was right about one thing. Nothing stays buried forever. But he'd made a crucial mistake in his calculations. He thought he was dealing with the same scared woman from 8 years ago. The one who ran from Denver with her tail between her legs. He had no idea what I was capable of now. I reached for my laptop in the dark. If Louis wanted to play this game, fine. But this time, I wouldn't be the only one with secrets exposed. It was time to find out what my brother-in-law was really hiding in those books Olive wanted to audit. You're telling me Louis has access to the company's offshore accounts? Haley's voice crackled through my earbuds as I sat in my parked car outside Cooper Industries. That's not even legal without Olive's signature. Exactly. I watched employees filter out of the building for lunch break. And guess who conveniently handles all the paperwork for my sister? God, Willow, this is bigger than blackmail. Papers rustled on Haley's end. As a corporate accountant, she knew exactly what we were looking at. If he's embezzling, I need proof. I checked my watch. Lewis has his weekly golf game right now. I'm going in. Wait, what? You're breaking into his office? Not breaking in. I have legitimate access. I'm still a board member. I grabbed my laptop bag. Just stay on the line? Like I'd let you do this alone. Haley scoffed. Using my key card, I walked through the lobby with practiced confidence. Morning, Jerry. I called to the security guard. Ms. Willow, thought you worked from home on Wednesdays. Forgot some files for tomorrow's meeting. I held up my laptop bag as proof. You know how it is. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt endless. When the doors opened, I nearly collided with Mara, my younger sister. Willow, she frowned. What are you doing here? I thought you had that charity thing today. Changed plans. I forced a smile. Just need to grab something from my office. Well, hurry up. Olive's been trying to reach you. Something about Sunday dinner. I'll call her later. I waited until Mara disappeared into the elevator before speed walking to Lewis's office. You're clear, Haley confirmed in my ear. But hurry. Inside Lewis's office, I went straight to his computer. Okay, what am I looking for? Start with his email, any correspondence with banks, especially international ones. I plugged in my USB drive, running the program Haley had given me. You're sure this will work? It'll copy his entire email history without leaving a trace. Just give it 5 minutes. While the program ran, I rifled through his desk drawers. Nothing unusual until I reached the bottom right drawer, locked. Haley, he's got a locked drawer. Leave it. We don't want him knowing someone was there. Wait, I noticed something. There's a business card stuck in the crack. Using a letter opener, I carefully fished it out. What is it? Some investment firm in the Cayman Islands. I photographed both sides with my phone. And there's a handwritten number on the back. Suddenly, voices in the hallway made me freeze. Just need to grab those files from my office. Lewis's voice carried through the door. Shit! I yanked the USB drive out, closed everything, and dove under his desk just as the door opened. I thought you had golf, a woman's voice, Olive's, said. Got rained out. Listen, about that audit. I know you think I'm being paranoid, Olive sighed. But the numbers don't add up, Louis. As CEO, I need to know where our money is going. And I've shown you the reports, everything's accounted for. Then why won't you let me bring in external auditors? My heart pounded so hard, I was sure they could hear it. Under the desk, I could see their feet, Lewis's expensive golf shoes, and Olive's red heels. Because it's a waste of money, Louis said smoothly. Besides, don't you trust me? A pause. Of course I do. They left shortly after, but I waited an extra 5 minutes before crawling out. My hands were shaking as I straightened my clothes. Willow, are you okay? Haley's voice reminded me she was still there. I'm fine. But Haley, I locked Lewis's office behind me. I think my sister's in trouble. Back in my car, I called up the photos of the business card, while Haley examined the copied emails on her end. This is bad, she said finally. These transactions, he's been moving money through shell companies for months, millions of dollars. Can we prove it's illegal? Not yet, but combined with those offshore accounts, Willow, you need to tell Olive. I started my car. She won't believe me. You heard her in there. She trusts him completely. Then what's your plan? I pulled out of the parking lot, my mind racing. Sunday dinner, Dad's making some kind of announcement. Everyone will be there. You're going to expose him in front of the whole family. No. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. I'm going to give him one chance to come clean, to resign and return the money quietly. And if he refuses, then I'll destroy him. The calm in my voice surprised even me. But first, we need more proof. And I think I know exactly where to find it. The country club's annual charity gala was in full swing when I spotted Louis across the ballroom, charming a group of investors. My brother-in-law caught my eye and raised his champagne glass with a smirk that made my blood boil. "Easy," Haley whispered beside me. "Remember why we're here." I smoothed my dress and forced a smile. "Right. Where's Olive?" "By the silent auction." She looks upset. Making our way through the crowd, we found my sister staring at her phone, her usual composure cracking. "Olive?" I touched her arm. "What's wrong?" She quickly locked her screen. "Nothing, I'm fine." But her voice trembled. "Just tired. Louis has been working late every night this week." "Including weekends?" Haley asked innocently. Olive's face tightened. "He's dedicated to the company." "So dedicated he's missing your anniversary dinner." I gestured to her evening gown. "That's why you're dressed up, right? He'll make it up to me." Olive grabbed another champagne from a passing waiter. "He always does." Before I could respond, Mara appeared. "There you are. Dad's looking for everyone. He wants a family photo." As we gathered near the grand staircase, I watched Louis make excuses to his group and join us. He slipped his arm around Olive's waist, but his eyes were on his phone. "Where's Santiago?" Dad asked, looking around. "Business trip," I replied. "Back tomorrow." "Always working. That husband of yours." Louis's comment carried an edge. "Must be lonely." I met his gaze. "At least he's where he says he is." The photographer interrupted our staring match, directing us into position. As camera flashes lit up the room, I felt my phone vibrate. A text from Haley. "Package delivered." While Louis was busy playing host, Haley had arranged for a courier to accidentally deliver sensitive documents to his home office instead of the company headquarters. Documents that would keep him occupied tomorrow morning, giving me time to access his real records. Later, as the gala wound down, I overheard Olive on the phone near the ladies' room. "What do you mean you're not coming home?" Her voice cracked. "Louis, it's our anniversary." "No, I understand. The investors are important." "Yes, okay. Love you too." She ended the call and pressed her forehead against the wall. "Olive," I approached carefully. She straightened immediately, wiping her eyes. "Don't start, Willow, please." "Start what?" "The judgment. The I told you so looks." She turned to face me. "I see how you watch him, like you're just waiting for him to fail." "I'm worried about you." "Well, don't be. I'm fine. Everything's fine." She grabbed her clutch. "I should go. Early meeting tomorrow." "Let me drive you home." "I have my car." She paused at the door. "Willow, do you ever wonder if we've grown too far apart?" My chest tightened. "Every day. Maybe we could do lunch next week, just us." "I'd like that." After she left, I found Haley by the bar. "We need to move faster. She's starting to suspect something's wrong." "The documents will keep him busy until noon," Haley confirmed. "I've got a friend in IT who can get us remote access to his home computer while he's distracted. And the security cameras. On a loop from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. You'll have 4 hours." I nodded, then froze as I spotted Louis leaving through a side door, not toward the parking lot, but toward the hotel attached to the club. "Follow him," Haley urged. "I'll create a distraction if needed." Keeping my distance, I watched Louis enter the hotel lobby and head for the elevators. As the doors closed behind him, I caught the floor number, 12. At the front desk, I flashed my most convincing smile. "Hi, I'm supposed to meet Mr. Cooper for a late business meeting. Could you remind me which room?" The clerk checked his computer, 1242, but he just went up with another guest. My stomach lurched. "Thank you." Back in the ballroom, I found Haley. "He's not working late with investors." "You don't know that for sure." Room 1242, I grabbed my coat. "Tomorrow isn't just about finding financial records anymore. I need proof of everything." "Willow," Haley caught my arm. "Be careful. Men like Louis. When they're cornered, they're dangerous." "So am I." I headed for the exit, my resolve hardening. And unlike him, I have nothing left to lose. The security code to Louis and Olive's house hadn't changed since last Christmas. I slipped inside, my rubber gloves catching on the doorknob. The house felt different in the morning silence, threatening, almost. "I'm in," I whispered into my phone. "Louis just called the office," Haley reported. "He's furious about the mixed-up delivery. Should keep him busy for at least 2 hours." I headed straight for his home office. Starting the download now. The USB drive Haley had prepared began copying Louis's hard drive. While waiting, I attacked the locked filing cabinet with the key I'd had copied from Olive's set during a recent sisterly lunch. "Willow," Santiago's voice nearly stopped my heart. "Are you here?" "Santiago?" I hissed into the phone. "Haley, why is my husband here? His flight must have landed early. Want me to call him?" But Santiago was already climbing the stairs. I yanked the USB drive out, shoved the files back, and ducked into the adjacent bathroom just as he reached the second floor. "Honey?" His footsteps passed the bathroom. "I saw your car outside." My phone buzzed. Another text from Louis. "Hope you're ready to play ball at tomorrow's board meeting. Would hate for Santiago to learn what kind of woman he really married." Santiago's voice came closer. "Willow?" I flushed the toilet and stepped out, forcing a smile. "Hey, you're home early. What are you doing here?" He looked confused. "Olive said you had meetings all morning." Think fast. "Left my laptop here during Sunday dinner. Olive said I could pick it up." "In the bathroom? Had to pee?" I tried to guide him toward the stairs, but he wasn't moving. "Willow." His voice turned serious. "What's really going on? You've been acting strange for weeks. Sneaking around, whispering on the phone." "It's nothing." "Is there?" He swallowed hard. "Is there someone else?" "What?" "No." I grabbed his hands. "Santiago, no. Never." "Then what?" The front door opened downstairs. Luis's voice carried up. "Just need to grab those files, and I'll be right back." Santiago saw the panic in my eyes. Without a word, he pulled me into the guest bedroom, closing the door silently behind us. Luis's footsteps entered his office. Papers shuffled, drawers opened and closed. "Damn it," Luis muttered. Then louder, "Hello? Anyone here?" We stayed frozen until his footsteps retreated and the front door slammed. Santiago turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Start talking." So I did. Not about Denver, I couldn't, not yet, but about Luis's embezzlement, his affairs, the blackmail. With each word, Santiago's face darkened. "I'll kill him," he said when I finished. "No," I squeezed his arm. "I have a plan, but I need proof of everything." "The hotel room," Santiago said suddenly. "Room 1242. You said he goes there regularly?" I nodded. "I have a client who owns that hotel chain. One call, and we can get the security footage." For the first time in weeks, I felt tears form. "You believe me? Just like that, Willow." He cupped my face. "I've known something was wrong. I thought—" "Well, it doesn't matter what I thought. I trust you. Whatever he has on you, whatever happened in Denver." "Santiago, no." He pressed his forehead to mine. "When you're ready to tell me, you will. Until then, let me help you take this bastard down." My phone buzzed. "Haley, Luis is heading back. Get out now." We barely made it to our cars before Luis's Mercedes turned into the driveway. As we drove away separately, me to work, Santiago to make that call, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. But at the office, reality crashed back. Olive was waiting in my doorway, her eyes red. "We need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. "About Louis." My heart stopped. "What about him?" She pulled out her phone, showing me a photo. It was Louis entering the hotel with a woman I recognized as our head of marketing. "I followed him last night," Olive whispered. "After the gala, tell me I'm crazy. Tell me there's an explanation." I took her hand. "Sit down, sis. There's something you need to know." But before I could continue, my computer pinged. An email from Louis to the entire board. "Emergency meeting tomorrow. Agenda." Vote of no confidence in current CEO leadership. He was making his move against Olive, and I was running out of time. He's trying to take my company. Olive's voice cracked as she paced my office. My father's company? Sit down, I urged. You need to see this. I pulled up the financial records we'd uncovered. Lewis has been moving money through shell companies, millions of dollars, Olive. She shook her head. No, there has to be an explanation. My phone buzzed. Santiago. Got the footage? It's bad, really bad. Show her, I texted back. Minutes later, Santiago arrived with a USB drive. Without a word, he plugged it into my computer and pulled up the hotel's security footage. Olive watched in silence as Lewis entered room 1242 with different women on different dates. Her hands trembled as the timestamps showed his late meetings for what they really were. Stop. She turned away. I can't. There's more, I said gently. The offshore accounts, the falsified board documents. I said stop. She slammed her hand on my desk. Why are you doing this? Why do you hate him so much? Because he's destroying everything Dad built. I pulled out the Cayman Islands bank statements. Look at these numbers, Olive. Really look at them. She did. Her accountant's mind finally engaging past her emotions. These transfers, they don't match our books. Because he's been cooking them, using your signature. My signature? She grabbed the papers. I never signed these. Exactly. The color drained from her face. The audit, he fought so hard against it because it would expose everything. Santiago finished. Olive sank into a chair. The board meeting tomorrow. He's going to try to oust me. Not if we stop him first. I shared a look with Santiago. We have until morning to get everything in order. But Olive, we need you with us. She stared at the photo of Lewis and his latest mistress for a long moment. Then she straightened her spine, wiped her eyes, and when she looked up, I saw our father's steel in her gaze. What do you need me to do? The next few hours were a blur. Haley arrived with more financial evidence. Santiago's hotel contact sent additional footage. Olive called our family lawyer. Dad needs to know, Olive said suddenly. Before tomorrow. I checked the time. He'll still be at the office. 20 minutes later, we walked into our father's corner office. He took one look at our faces and put down his phone. What's happened? Olive laid out everything. The affairs, the embezzlement, the coup attempt. Dad listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each revelation. I trusted him, he said finally. Put him in charge of expansion, gave him access to everything. Dad, I'm so sorry, Olive whispered. I should have seen it. He shook his head. No, I should have listened when you wanted that audit. He turned to me. And you've been investigating this alone? Not alone, I said, thinking of Haley and Santiago. But there's something else you should know about why Lewis targeted me first. Denver, Dad said simply. I stared at him. You knew. I'm on the board of that company, remember? I knew the whole story. How they tried to frame you, how you helped expose their fraud instead. He smiled sadly. I was waiting for you to tell me in your own time. Fresh tears spilled down my cheeks. I thought you'd be ashamed. Of what? My daughter doing the right thing. He stood up. Now, about tomorrow's meeting. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Parking garage. Level 3. Now. Come alone, or the Denver files go public. Lewis, I breathed. What? Olive grabbed my phone. Willow, no, it's not safe. This might be our only chance to get him to confess. I headed for the door. Have security ready. And record everything. I'm coming with you, Santiago insisted. No. I touched his cheek. I need to do this alone, but stay close. The parking garage was dimly lit and eerily quiet. I found Lewis leaning against his car, smoking, a habit Olive had made him quit years ago. I have to admit, he said, you played this well, getting Santiago involved, turning Olive against me. You did that yourself, he laughed darkly. Maybe, but I'm not going down alone. He pulled out his phone. One call, and everyone learns about Denver. Your perfect life implodes. Go ahead. I stepped closer. I'm not afraid anymore. No? He moved suddenly, grabbing my arm. You should be. Actually, I smiled. You should. The garage lights blazed on. Security officers emerged from behind pillars. And there was Olive, phone raised, recording everything. It's over, Louis, she said. Let her go. His grip tightened for a moment. Then, finally, he released me. As security led him away, I heard him mutter, "You'll regret this." But watching him go, seeing Olive's strength, feeling Santiago's arms around me, I knew I wouldn't. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe again. Tomorrow's board meeting was going to be interesting. The boardroom crackled with tension as directors filed in. Louis sat at the far end, his usual smirk firmly in place, despite last night's confrontation. Beside me, Olive gripped her folder, so tight her knuckles turned white. You okay? I whispered. She nodded slightly. Just want this over with. Mara slipped into the seat across from us, confusion clear on her face. What's going on? Why's everyone so tense? Before anyone could respond, Dad called the meeting to order. We're here to address serious allegations regarding company leadership. Yes, Louis stood, straightening his tie. As outlined in my email, I move for a vote of no confidence in the current CEO. Murmurs rippled through the room. Louis clicked his presentation remote, and graphs appeared on the screen. Under the current leadership, our profits have declined, our expansion plans have stalled, and questionable decisions have put our company at risk. I watched the other board members' faces as Louis wove his web of lies. Some nodded, others frowned. Mara looked increasingly troubled. Furthermore, Louis continued, I have evidence of mismanagement that, actually, Olive cut in, her voice steady. I'd like to present some evidence of my own. She nodded to our IT director, who switched the display to our presentation. The first slide showed Louis's offshore accounts. What is this? Louis demanded. The truth. Olive stood. These are unauthorized transfers you made using my forged signature. Over $12 million, siphoned through shell companies in the Cayman Islands. The room erupted. Louis's face reddened. These documents are clearly fabricated. They're authenticated by 3 separate forensic accountants, Dad interrupted, as is the evidence of your other activities. The next slides appeared: hotel receipts, security footage, bank statements. With each revelation, Louis's composure cracked further. This is absurd, he sputtered. You can't what? I stood. Can't expose your affairs, your theft, your blackmail attempts. Shut up. He pointed at me. You want to talk about exposure? Tell them about Denver. Tell them what you did. Dead silence fell. All eyes turned to me. I took a deep breath. 8 years ago, I discovered fraud at my previous company. When I reported it, they tried to frame me as the perpetrator. Instead of running, I worked with federal investigators to expose the real criminals. The case was sealed to protect the investigation, but I have nothing to hide. She's lying. Louis's voice rose. She's trying to destroy me because you're stealing from my family? Olive's voice cracked. Because you're sleeping with half the executive floor. Because you threatened my sister. Olive, baby, please, don't. She held up her phone, playing the garage recording. Louis's threats echoed through the boardroom speakers. Mara gasped. Other board members shifted uncomfortably. Louis's face went from red to white. The police have been notified, Dad announced. They're waiting outside, but first, he turned to the board. We need to vote, all in favor of removing Louis from his position and pressing charges. Hands rose around the room. Even those who'd nodded during Louis's presentation now turned against him. You can't do this, Louis said. But his voice had lost its power. I built this company's international division. While stealing from it, Olive countered. Security will escort you out. The police will handle the rest. As security officers entered, Louis made one last desperate move. He lunged across the table, reaching for the laptop with the evidence. Santiago, who'd been quietly watching from the doorway, moved faster. He caught Louis mid-lunge, pinning him against the wall. "Touch my wife or her family again," Santiago growled, "and fraud charges will be the least of your worries." The police led Louis away in handcuffs. Through the boardroom windows, we watched him ducking into a patrol car, his perfect suit wrinkled, his carefully crafted image shattered. Mara approached us, tears in her eyes. "Olive, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." Olive hugged her tightly. "None of us did, not for a long time." "What happens now?" someone asked. Dad cleared his throat. "Now we rebuild. Starting with a full audit, complete transparency, and," he smiled at Olive, "the right CEO leading the way." As the board members filed out, Haley poked her head in. "Is it over?" I nodded, exhausted but relieved. "It's over. Good." She held up a bottle of champagne. "Because this calls for a celebration." Later, as we gathered in Dad's office, glasses raised, I watched my family, bruised but unbroken. Olive was already discussing recovery plans with the CFO. Mara and Haley were laughing about something. Santiago hadn't let go of my hand since the confrontation. "To truth," Dad proposed. "To family," Olive added. I raised my glass, finally free of secrets and shadows. "To new beginnings." The courthouse hallway buzzed with tension as we waited for Louis's arraignment to begin. 3 weeks had passed since the boardroom showdown, but the wounds still felt fresh. "You don't have to be here." Santiago squeezed my hand. "Yes, I do." I watched Olive pace nearby, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor. "We all do." Our lawyer approached, briefcase in hand. "They're ready. Remember, no outbursts, no matter what he says." Inside the courtroom, Louis looked smaller somehow. His expensive suit had been replaced by standard-issue orange, his usual swagger reduced to defeated shuffling. As the charges were read, embezzlement, fraud, forgery, extortion, I felt Olive trembling beside me. Mara reached across to hold her hand. "How does the defendant plead?" Louis stood. For a moment, his eyes locked with mine, and I saw a flicker of his old arrogance. "Not guilty, Your Honor." Olive's sharp intake of breath echoed through the quiet courtroom. "Very well. Bail is set at—" "Your Honor," the prosecutor interrupted. "Given the defendant's extensive overseas connections and the amount of money still unaccounted for, we request he be held without bail." Louis's attorney objected, but the judge agreed. As officers led Louis away, he turned suddenly. "Olive," his voice cracked. "Baby, please. Tell them this is all a mistake." Olive stood, her voice clear and strong. "The only mistake was trusting you." Outside, reporters swarmed us. Dad stepped forward, shielding his daughters from the cameras. "The family has no comment at this time," our lawyer announced. "However, Cooper Industries will be issuing a statement regarding the company's path forward." Back at the office, Olive buried herself in damage control. I found her surrounded by papers, her eyes red but determined. "The external auditors found another account," she said without looking up. "In Singapore this time." "How much?" "3 million. She finally met my gaze. Did I really miss all the signs? Was I that blind? "He fooled everyone." "Not you." She pushed back from her desk. "You saw through him from the start." "Why didn't I listen?" "Because you loved him." I perched on her desk. "That's not a weakness, Olive." "Isn't it?" She held up a photo from her desk, their wedding day. "Look at his face. He was smiling like that while stealing from us, sleeping around, threatening you." I took the photo and dropped it in the trash. "Then let's focus on what's next." Her computer pinged, an email from the prosecutor's office. As she read it, her face paled. "What is it?" "Louis's attorney." She swallowed hard. "They're offering a deal. If he returns the money and pleads guilty to reduced charges." "That's good, right? Saves us a trial." "There's more." She turned the screen toward me. "He wants to talk to me, alone." "Absolutely not. I need to know why, Willow." Her voice cracked. 10 years of marriage, and I never really knew him. I need answers. which is how we ended up at the detention center the next day, watching Olive walk into the visitation room alone. Through the observation window, I saw Louis in his jumpsuit, hands cuffed to the table. "She's got this," Haley assured me. 20 minutes later, Olive emerged, her face unreadable. "Well?" I asked. He confessed. She walked straight to the exit, to everything. Said he never meant for it to go this far, but once he started. Did he apologize? "Oh, he apologized." She laughed bitterly. "Right before asking me to write a letter to the judge requesting leniency." In the parking lot, she suddenly stopped. "He said something else, about Denver." My heart stopped. "Olive." "He told me the whole story, about how you discovered the fraud, how they tried to frame you, how you helped bring down the real criminals." She turned to face me. "Why didn't you tell me?" I was ashamed. "Scared of how you'd react." "Scared?" She shook her head. "Willow, you were a hero. You did the right thing, no matter the cost." She hugged me fiercely. "I'm so sorry I let him use that against you." My phone buzzed, a news alert. Louis had accepted the plea deal. 15 years, full restitution, no possibility of early release. "It's really over," Olive whispered. But looking at my sister, seeing her strength, her resilience, I knew it wasn't over. It was a beginning, of healing, of rebuilding trust, of becoming the family we were meant to be. "Come on," I linked my arm through hers. "Dad's waiting. Something about a new company direction he wants to discuss." As we walked to the car, Olive squeezed my arm. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "Never," I promised. "That's what sisters are for." The autumn breeze carried the scent of grilled food and laughter across our backyard. Santiago manned the grill, while Dad and Mara argued playfully about proper burger flipping technique. Through the kitchen window, I watched Olive arranging a salad, her shoulders relaxed for the first time in months. "Need help?" I asked, joining her. "Actually," she pulled an envelope from her purse. "I need your opinion on something." Inside was a letter from Louis's attorney, requesting one final meeting before his transfer to federal prison. "You're not considering it?" "No." She tore the letter in half. "I just wanted you to know I'm done looking back." The doorbell rang. Haley burst in, waving a newspaper. "Have you seen this?" The headline read, "Cooper Industries launches Women's Business Initiative." Below was a photo of Olive and me at the program's announcement ceremony. "Dad's idea?" Haley asked. "Mine, actually." Olive smiled. "Using the recovered funds to help women start their own businesses, teach financial literacy, turn something ugly into something beautiful," I finished. "Speaking of beautiful," Haley nodded toward the window. Outside, Santiago was showing Mara's daughter how to make the perfect s'more, while Dad set up the projector for our outdoor movie night. The scene looked like every family gathering should. Warm, genuine, free from shadows. "Dinner's ready," Santiago called. As we carried food outside, Olive grabbed my arm. "Wait, before everyone sits down." She handed me another envelope. "Open it." Inside was a legal document. My hands trembled as I read it. "Co-CEO?" I looked up. "Olive, I can't." "Yes, you can." She gripped my shoulders. "You saved this company, Willow. More importantly, you saved me. I want us to rebuild it together, the way Dad always intended. Is this a private sister moment, or can anyone join?" Mara appeared, balancing plates. "Actually," I showed her the document. "What do you think about handling our international legal division?" Her eyes widened. "Really?" "Family business," Olive said simply. "Emphasis on family." Dad clinked his glass, gathering everyone around the table. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, making everything feel magical. "Before we eat," he said, "I want to say something." He looked at each of us in turn. "These past months have tested us, hurt us, but look at us now. Stronger than ever," Mara added. "And smarter," Olive smiled. "No more blind trust. No more secrets," I agreed. Catching Santiago's eye, he winked. knowing I'd finally told him everything about Denver. To new chapters, Dad raised his glass, and second chances, Olive added. My phone buzzed. A text from our lawyer. Lewis's transfer complete. Case officially closed. I switched off my phone without responding. Some chapters didn't need revisiting. Hey, Santiago pulled me close. You okay? Better than okay. I watched my family, Mara teaching her daughter to balance a loaded plate, Haley arguing with Dad about movie choices, Olive laughing at something Santiago's brother said. I'm home. Movie time, Mara's daughter announced, chocolate smeared across her face. As everyone settled into chairs and blankets, I heard Olive humming, an old song our mom used to sing. When she caught me watching, she didn't stop or look away. Instead, she smiled and continued, letting the melody carry across our gathering. The opening credits rolled, but I barely noticed them. I was too busy memorizing this moment. The warmth of Santiago beside me, the sound of my family's laughter, the feeling of finally being free from the weight I'd carried for so long. Pass the popcorn, Haley whispered, snuggling into her chair. And stop looking so philosophical. It's movie night, not therapy. I threw popcorn at her head, starting a mini food fight that had Dad rolling his eyes and Mara's daughter giggling uncontrollably. Children, please, Olive said in her best CEO voice, but she was fighting a smile. As peace restored and the movie played, I felt Santiago squeeze my hand. Proud of you, he murmured. I squeezed back, thinking of all we'd overcome. The blackmail, the threats, the fear. They'd tried to break us. Instead, they'd forged us into something stronger. Above us, stars began appearing in the darkening sky. The movie played on, but the real story, our story, was written in the quiet moments between scenes. In Olive's renewed confidence, in Mara's growing trust, in Dad's proud glances. In the end, it wasn't about revenge or justice. It was about family, about truth, about finding our way back to each other. And as I sat there, surrounded by love and laughter, I knew we'd found something better than victory. We'd found ourselves.
Hello, everyone. My name is Betty, and I'd like to share a personal story with all of you. My mother-in-law, Madison, was once quite a different individual compared to the rather superficial and self-centered person she presents as today. This transformation, my husband Edward believes, took place later in her life. Growing up, Edward and his mother Madison lived quite humbly. Their circumstances became particularly challenging after the tragic loss of Edward's father when he was only 5 years old. Despite the hardships, Madison to the occasion became the sole provider, ensuring that they led a simple yet stable life. This backdrop makes their story all the more poignant, especially after Edward, through sheer determination and brilliance, earned a full scholarship to medical school and eventually became a respected doctor. Despite his professional success, Edward has always stayed grounded, a trait I admire deeply. However, Madison's lifestyle shifted significantly towards luxury after Edward's career took off. To give you more context about myself, I currently do not hold a job for reasons I will explain in time, but this in no way means I am financially unstable or reliant on others. Unfortunately, my first meeting with Madison started on the wrong foot due to her misinterpretation of my appearance and demeanor. When she first met me, her immediate reaction was less than welcoming. "Edward, is this the girl you've been excited about?" she questioned. "She looks so ordinary and unremarkable. Why choose her? Does she even work?" At that moment, Madison wrongfully pegged me as someone who might be aiming to ensnare her son for financial gain, branding me unfairly as a gold digger. It's a complex dynamic, one that unfolds more each day, and through sharing this story, I hope to bring to light the nuances of our relationships and the misunderstandings that often cloud our judgments. Continuing from the previous event, Madison's unfounded judgments about my character led to a tense argument. despite Edward defending me staunchly. The disagreement became so heated that we decided to leave. On our drive home, Edward offered his apologies for his mother's behavior and admitted she had overstepped her boundaries. He tried to console me, suggesting that his mother had changed and no longer resembled the person she used to be. Although her harsh words stung, Edward urged me not to take them to heart. However, the thought of being around Madison comfortably seemed daunting. After all, she was Edward's only remaining parent. I chose to maintain some distance, understanding that completely cutting ties was not a practical solution given our small family circle. "I'm not expecting you to be friends with her, but could you manage to be civil?" Edward asked. I agreed to be respectful towards his mother, although I was doubtful she would return the favor. "Don't worry, Betty," Edward reassured me. "If she steps out of line again, we'll reassess our interactions with her. I love my mom, but I love you too, and I won't let her mistreat you without cause." Despite Edward's promises to defend me, I remained uneasy about my relationship with Madison. 4 years after we began dating, Edward and I got married in a simple court ceremony, mainly due to our tight budget. Edward was financially supporting Madison by sending her a substantial amount each month for what he termed emergencies, a practice he continued even after our marriage, which put a strain on our finances. I never interfered, believing it was his right to support his mother. However, Madison's behavior grew problematic. She frequently spoke negatively about me to her friends, perpetuating rumors that painted me as a gold digger. At first, I tried to ignore her slander, but it began to tarnish my reputation. Despite Edward's best efforts to mediate, Madison never warmed up to me. She remained convinced that I was not a suitable match for her son, continuing to treat me with disdain and suspicion. This ongoing tension made me question how long we could manage the delicate balance of our family dynamic. One day, out of the blue, Edward shared some surprising news with me. His mother, Madison, wanted to invite me to a small gathering she was planning. Given her evident dislike for me, I was naturally skeptical about her sudden change of heart. Edward reassured me, however, insisting that Madison was eager to make amends and genuinely wanted me to be there. Although her financial situation had been precarious recently, Edward was convinced she had found a way to manage this event. Despite my reservations about her past behavior, I agreed to attend. Edward was hopeful that his mother was making a sincere effort, so I decided to approach the situation with an open mind. I was keen for us to repair our strained relationship and perhaps even build a friendship. Yet, deep down, I harbored serious doubts about Madison's intentions and whether she truly valued her son's happiness. As the party approached, I awaited details from Madison with a mix of eagerness and apprehension. When Madison finally texted me the next day, I assumed she was confirming the invitation. Instead, her message took a completely unexpected turn. She began by casually mentioning the venue, a renowned 5-star hotel that was the talk of the town, and the fabulous time she promised her friends. She excitedly noted that she would be bringing 21 guests. Curious, I inquired if I was indeed invited, based on Edward's assurances. To my shock, Madison's response was both arrogant and dismissive. She clarified that I was not invited, stressing the event's exclusivity, her family's wealth, and the supposed high status of her guests. I was stunned and confused, especially since Edward had been so confident that his mother was extending an olive branch. Feeling humiliated but needing to maintain my composure, I responded to Madison, expressing my misunderstanding calmly. Her reply was patronizing, suggesting that I couldn't possibly grasp the complexities of organizing such a high-caliber event. Faced with this disdain, I chose to preserve my dignity, acknowledging her message without further argument. In the wake of Madison's dismissive message, I clarified that I had no interest in attending a gathering where I was unwelcome. Despite this, Madison doubled down on her exclusivity claims, flaunting her supposed class and status. Though I felt a strong urge to react angrily, I decided against it. Instead of sharing the upsetting exchange with Edward, I chose to keep it to myself and wait for the day of the party to pass. On the day of the event, Madison, apparently oblivious to the emotional toll her words had taken, sent me a photograph of herself and her friends dressed in lavish designer outfits, boasting about their evening on social media. I chose not to engage and instead focused on my work, patiently waiting to see how the situation would unfold. About 2 hours later, I received a call from my father, a call that brought an unexpected twist to the story. Here's something I hadn't shared widely. My father owns the hotel where Madison was hosting her party. This was something Madison did not know. 4 years ago, I inherited a substantial sum from my grandfather, which I invested in my father's business. As a result, I now receive a share of the profits from the hotel and other family-owned enterprises. Despite my comfortable financial background, I've always preferred to keep a low profile, which is why Madison was unaware of my connection to the venue. My father's call brought another surprise. Madison and her friends, unaware of the high costs associated with such a luxurious venue, had racked up a bill of $4,000. After enjoying their evening, they requested a 60% discount, claiming they were short on cash. My father, knowing the situation and seeing how Madison's group had been rude and entitled, upsetting his staff, sought my advice on how to handle the situation. Faced with this ironic scenario, Madison flaunting her supposed superiority at a party she couldn't afford, I shared my frustrations with my dad. We recounted how Madison had used the event to demean me, not knowing that it was my family's property. The irony of her inability to pay the bill did not escape me, serving as a small, albeit unintended form of retribution for her earlier behavior. As my dad and I discussed Madison's ostentatious party and the burdensome behavior her group imposed on the hotel staff, he fully grasped the situation and shared the staff's frustrations. Seeing a chance for a teachable moment wrapped in a bit of poetic justice, I half-jokingly suggested that Madison and her entourage could perhaps make amends by washing dishes and cleaning the kitchen and floors given their disrespectful demeanor. While this idea of revenge seemed fitting to address the way they had treated our staff, it was also a way to make a point about humility and respect. If Madison escalated the situation foolishly, my dad even joked that he could involve the authorities, though we hoped it wouldn't come to that. My dad chuckled at my suggestion, giving it an enthusiastic endorsement, and even proposed to document the event with photos. What seemed like an amusing idea turned into a real scenario. About an hour later, my dad sent me photos of Madison and her friends, somewhat humbled, washing dishes and cleaning the floors at the hotel's restaurant. He relayed that when Madison realized he was the owner, her demeanor shifted to one of relief, as she assumed her acquaintance with the owner would ease her predicament. However, to her astonishment, my dad directed her to help clean as a consequence of her actions. Temporarily dumbfounded, Madison protested, but my dad sternly reminded her that since she did not consider me as family, the familial courtesies she expected were not extended to her either. It was an ironic twist of fate, and although part of me regretted not witnessing the scene in person, the photographs were telling enough. Later that evening, Edward returned home, visibly disturbed. It was apparent that Madison had reached out to him, likely sharing a skewed version of the events. He approached me, concerned, asking about what he had heard regarding his mother being tasked with cleaning duties at the restaurant. At this moment, I had to navigate carefully, balancing between vindication and the preservation of my relationship with Edward, fully aware that the dynamics had shifted unexpectedly due to the day's unusual events. I took the time to explain the situation to Edward, outlining that what occurred at the restaurant was a standard consequence given the circumstances. I detailed how Madison had come to our family-owned restaurant, accumulated a bill of $4,000, claimed she could only pay $2,000, and then harassed our staff. The event she hosted had turned into an utter nightmare, and the actions taken were, I believe, entirely appropriate given her behavior. Edward, visibly surprised by my explanation, inquired about the guests Madison had brought along and what they had ordered. I told him that contrary to what she had told him, Madison didn't bring just 5 people. She had brought 21 guests who indulged heavily in the priciest items on the menu. Edward was stunned. Madison had told him she had invited me as well, but I had declined. I corrected him, showing him the text messages from Madison that clearly showed I was never genuinely invited. At Edward's request, I provided him with the restaurant bills and showed him all the texts exchanged. My father also sent him the receipts to substantiate the costs. To further clarify the extent of the event, I showed Edward some photos of Madison's lavish party. Seeing all the evidence, Edward's disbelief turned into anger. He immediately called Madison to confront her about the discrepancies in her story. Madison tried to downplay the situation, claiming she had only mentioned being short on cash and accused me of twisting the story to sabotage her. Edward countered her, pointing out the discrepancies between her story and the evidence, and reminded her that she had insulted me by saying I wasn't classy enough to attend her event. Madison attempted to pass off her remarks as just a harmless joke, but Edward wasn't convinced. He pressed her on her irresponsible spending, especially since the money was coming out of his pocket, and criticized her for insulting his wife while squandering funds on friends. Madison was left scrambling to justify her actions, but Edward expressed his profound disappointment and disbelief at her behavior, struggling to reconcile her actions with the mother he thought he knew. In a moment of heated conversation, Edward confronted his mother about her ongoing financial requests and her disrespectful behavior towards me. "I made a mistake by always giving you money when you told me you needed it, Mom. Well, guess what? I'm not doing that anymore." "But Edward, you've been so supportive all this time. You can't just stop now," Madison protested, her voice laced with desperation. "It was just a one-time mistake, Edward." "Why are you overreacting?" she added, trying to minimize her actions. "No, Mom, I'm not overreacting. This isn't just a one-time mistake. If you can't even consider my wife as family, then I don't want anything to do with you," Edward retorted. "I always hoped you would change your attitude, but you never did. I'm not going to pay you to insult my wife and call her classless, especially when she has sacrificed so much to support you. This ends now." Edward didn't wait for her to respond. He hung up on her, blocked her number, and turned to me, his demeanor softening. He apologized profusely for having doubted me initially and for not understanding the full extent of the situation sooner. I forgave him because, in the end, he truly stood up for me. We had a serious discussion about Madison and decided that for now it was best to distance ourselves from her. Edward, though now a wealthy man, remained humble and found his mother's behavior towards me utterly unacceptable. I agreed, feeling relieved and validated by his support. Together, we resolved to remove the negativity she brought into our lives. A few days later, the gravity of her actions began to dawn on Madison. Realizing that her behavior might have irreparably harmed her relationship with her son, she was thrown into a state of panic. However, the decision had been made, and for us, it marked a new beginning, free from the strain and tension her presence had caused. After Edward ceased providing financial support, Madison's lifestyle underwent a drastic change. Accustomed to a high-end life funded largely by Edward's generosity, she suddenly found herself struggling to maintain her standard of living. Despite having a job, her earnings were not sufficient to cover the opulent expenses she had grown used to. As a result, she began showing up at our house, initially making demands to speak with Edward, which soon turned into desperate pleas as she was repeatedly turned away at the door. In the meantime, Edward redirected his financial support towards my father's business, investing in the expansion of his hotel and restaurant ventures within our neighborhood. We have aspirations to grow the business into larger cities, but these plans are still in the early stages of development. The change in financial support meant Madison had to significantly downgrade her lifestyle. She struggled to afford her rented condo and eventually had to terminate her lease, moving into a smaller one-bedroom apartment where budgeting for anything beyond basic necessities became her new reality. She often emailed us about her financial difficulties, still downplaying her previous behavior and suggesting that we were overreacting to the situation. It was clear that she wasn't ready to fully acknowledge her role in the estrangement. As we decided to distance ourselves from Madison for the foreseeable future, life brought us an unexpected joy. I discovered I was pregnant. Edward and I are thrilled and have been busy preparing for our new arrival. With the baby on the way, I'm relieved that our child will be shielded from the negativity that Madison brought into our lives. Nonetheless, should the time come when Madison wishes to be part of our child's life, I am determined to ensure that she does not impart any harmful influences. For now, we are focused on welcoming our child into a loving and stable environment, away from any shallow or disruptive influences. We appreciate any well wishes as we embark on this exciting journey of parenthood, hoping to provide the best for our child. I married Raymond because he is the son of my former boss, and 4 years ago, we tied the knot. Although we haven't started a family yet, we have enjoyed a generally happy life together. Raymond dedicates himself to his job and often has to be away, which leaves me feeling a bit lonely sometimes, but he makes up for it by spending quality time with me on his days off. I first met Raymond through my father, and it wasn't long before he suggested I should embrace the role of a stay-at-home wife. This arrangement gave me ample time to pursue my interests. I took up sewing and knitting, befriending our neighbors, and even started a fitness routine. Each winter, I would gift Raymond handmade scarves and gloves. Though my initial attempts were a bit amateurish, I steadily improved. His appreciative comments over the years encouraged me greatly, and I grew to love crafting even more. I dream of the day when we can perhaps sew together as a family. I once shared this thought with Raymond, and he entertained the idea of joining in when that time comes, offering me a warm smile in return. Our life might seem quite privileged to others, thanks to Raymond's substantial income. I never skimped on supporting him, managing the household, or making the most of the moments we shared on his days off. I imagined a quiet, content future with my kind husband and, hopefully, children. However, about 3 years ago, a troubling incident occurred. I was waiting for Raymond to return from work when I suddenly felt dizzy and collapsed. Raymond rushed home just in time and hurriedly took me to the hospital. As I lay in my hospital bed recovering and vulnerable, Raymond, smiling, shockingly confessed, "I only married you because you're the boss's daughter." Seeing the scarves and gloves I had made for him carelessly discarded, devalued, and hearing his blunt words, I felt a strong urge to confront him with reality, to show him he was mistaken if he thought he could demean my worth. Despite the hurt, imagining his eventual realization of my value brought a wry smile to my face. I am Ashley Carroll, and this revelation was a harsh reality check on what I thought was a loving marriage. When I opened my eyes, I found myself in a hospital bed. From the snippets of the conversation between Raymond and the doctors, I understood that my condition was serious and likely a lifelong issue to manage. It wasn't immediately life-threatening, but the risk of recurrence meant that I needed to remain in the hospital for a while. Raymond tried to reassure me during one of his visits, holding my hand gently. "It looks like you'll be here for some time, but don't worry, I'll make time to visit and we'll get through this together." His presence and words eased my anxiety. Despite having no solid reason to believe so, I felt that everything might just turn out all right with my supportive husband by my side. True to his word, Raymond visited nearly every day. He would ask about my day, and, noticing how the hospital routine bored me, he even brought my favorite sewing tools. We spent our time together sewing and chatting about mundane daily events. Teaching my clumsy husband to sew became a highlight of my days, helping me to momentarily forget the dreariness of hospital life. This routine continued for about a year. I knitted a scarf for him as part of our yearly tradition, but after that, Raymond's visits became sporadic. Initially, I thought he was just caught up with work. I kept myself busy with sewing, planning to give him a pair of gloves I was making the next time he visited. Doctors had informed me that I was likely to be discharged by the end of the year. I poured all my emotions into crafting those gloves, hoping to bridge the gap created by the time we spent apart. However, when Raymond finally visited after a long absence, his reaction was chilling. He glanced coldly at the gloves I offered and said, "Are you still making these? It's honestly a nuisance now." He then handed me the scarf I had painstakingly knitted for him last year, untouched and pristine, along with divorce papers. Stunned, I could only stare as the reality sank in. The scarf, still as new as the day I had given it to him, and his harsh words, marked a painful end to what I had once believed was a supportive partnership. "Has it been 3 years since your hospitalization?" he remarked casually. "I heard you'll be discharged soon." His indifference was as cutting as the cold dismissal of everything I had cherished and invested my love in. "But I can't keep taking care of you," Raymond bluntly stated as he pushed the divorce papers toward me. I stared at them, stunned, as the weight of his words sunk in. His signature was already on the documents, a clear sign of his resolve. I had sensed this might happen, especially after his visits became less frequent. In an attempt to dismiss these fears, I had told myself he was just overwhelmed with work. However, the caring Raymond I knew would have kept me informed, no matter how busy he was. As he stood there waiting for my reaction, I managed to ask him calmly why he wanted a divorce. It wasn't out of desperation to hold on to him. Rather, I felt resigned, almost prepared for this moment. If the gentle Raymond I loved believed a divorce was necessary, perhaps he was right. Yet, part of me was confused because he was the one who had promised we would face this challenge together. Raymond's response was harsh and dismissive. "Isn't it obvious? Ever since I married you, all I've had are troubles. I'm sick and tired of the scarves and gloves you give me every year. I only married you because you're the boss's daughter. How can I be expected to deal with your illness on top of everything else?" He laughed mockingly, making it clear that he viewed my affectionate gestures as trivial and my illness as an inconvenience. As he spoke, I noticed a fancy, high-end scarf around his neck, one I did not recognize and certainly had not given him. It was superior to anything I had made. This realization hurt deeply. It seemed he had never appreciated any of my handmade gifts, possibly finding them annoying all along. In every discussion about happiness, love, or loneliness we had, Raymond had probably seen me as naive for cherishing these ideals. Who can even wear a handmade scarf without feeling embarrassed nowadays? Receiving such things is a nuisance, he continued, his words cutting through the air like a knife. Looking at the divorce papers again, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. Sadness because the man I loved had changed so drastically, and relief because at least now I knew the truth about how he truly felt. The clarity was painful but necessary. Unaware of the underlying motives, my hospitalization marked a shift in my relationship with Raymond. After my father retired from the company where Raymond worked, there was no longer a need for him to maintain appearances with me. Initially, Raymond seemed supportive, visiting me between work commitments. I now realized that these visits were more for the show, likely discussed at his workplace to paint him as a dedicated husband managing his professional responsibilities while caring for his ill wife. This narrative had served him well, boosting his image among colleagues who viewed him as both hardworking and compassionate. He had cultivated this persona to his advantage, something I only came to understand later. During a candid conversation, Raymond admitted that discussing my illness at work garnered him sympathy and accolades. It made things easier at work, he confessed without remorse. If I stayed late, I was diligent. If I needed a break, all I had to mention was my sick wife. He even hinted that my illness had inadvertently helped him secure a promotion. "They're all idiots, but I have to thank your illness for that," he said with a cold grin. This revelation crushed me. The man I had loved was unrecognizable, revealing a selfishness I couldn't have imagined. As we concluded our conversation, I handed him the signed divorce papers with a simple farewell. "Well, if I could be of help, that's good. We probably won't see each other again, so take care." He took the papers and left promptly, showing no further interest. The divorce was a quiet affair, and in the solitude that followed, I wept. Eventually, I was discharged and returned to live with my parents. My father was outraged when he learned the full extent of Raymond's behavior. "I never thought he would be that kind of guy," he exclaimed. However, by then, I had found a sense of detachment and calm. I reassured him, expressing my desire to move back home after settling affairs at the house I had shared with Raymond. My parents were supportive, encouraging me to do whatever made me happy. I decided to live with them for the time being. Before fully moving in, I planned one last visit to the house, perhaps to collect my things and close that chapter of my life for good. After my discharge from the hospital, I planned to return to the house where I had lived with my husband. However, upon arriving, I was confronted with a startling issue. The front door lock wasn't functioning. Puzzled, my parents and I decided to ring the doorbell, only to be greeted by a stranger. In my confusion, I asked about his presence, and he informed us that he had purchased the house a few months ago and was now living there with his family. This revelation only intensified my parents' anger, but I chose not to disturb the new family and quietly walked away. Still, I needed answers, so I immediately called my husband. He casually confirmed over the phone, "Yeah, I sold it while you were in the hospital. I'm keeping the sales money as compensation. It was my house to begin with, so you have no complaint, right?" His indifferent tone left me sighing in disbelief. I wished he had informed me sooner. From what the new owner shared, it seemed the house had been sold quite some time ago, likely about a year back when my husband's visits had ceased. Although our divorce had been finalized with the submission of our signed papers, we had agreed to discuss asset division and compensation after my discharge, planning a meeting for the following week. Yet, my husband had already acted on his own. I found his obliviousness troubling. Over the phone, I told him, "You don't understand anything, do you?" Confused, he asked, "Huh? What do you mean?" I responded, "I'll explain in detail next week," and hung up. I turned to my parents, who were visibly worried, and asked my father for a favor. He quickly prepared the necessary documents for the upcoming discussion. Despite the short notice, he assured me, "I've got it all prepared. There's not much time, but we'll manage." His determination was partly fueled by guilt for having introduced me to my husband and his resulting anger towards him. As we prepared for the meeting, held at my family's home, my parents and I sat in a line facing my husband, who was alone on the other side. Despite the strain the divorce had placed on my relationship with my parents, my husband appeared unconcerned, even displaying a slight smirk. During the discussion, he maintained, "I'm the victim here. However, I don't intend to demand too much. The proceeds from the sale of the house will suffice." His tone suggested he was being generous, but his smugness was palpable. As he spoke, my father's face turned crimson with anger. I placed my hand on him to calm him, knowing that in this situation we held the advantage. there's something important we need to discuss first, I began. At that moment, my father presented a document. The land on which the house stood was owned by him. The house was indeed in your name, I acknowledged to my husband. However, the land on which it stands belongs to my father. This revelation shifted the dynamic significantly, clarifying that while my husband might have sold the house, he had no right to the land it was built on. When I pointed out to my husband that my father still held the title to the land where our house stood, he was visibly taken aback but tried to mask it with a dismissive tone. So what? The house was mine. No one has the right to complain. Do you think you can retaliate against me with that? He scoffed, thinking the situation was laughable. Yes, the house was in your name, I acknowledged calmly, and you probably checked that there were no legal issues with selling it. However, I continued to explain the broader implications. From a legal standpoint, you're right. There was no problem with you selling the house. But think about the family that bought it. They own the house, but not the land it sits on. If my father chooses, he could demand rent from them, which would surely cause issues. I let that sink in for a moment before adding, of course, neither my father nor I plan to demand rent or evict them. We're not interested in causing distress. However, we can't just give up the rights to the land either. We could sell the land directly to the family, ensuring they have complete ownership. This would prevent any potential legal disputes they might face, or that you might face from them. The new owners, understandably, were upset when they learned about this complication. They realized that any issues arising from this oversight would fall on the seller, my husband. They were prepared to take legal action if necessary, which visibly worried him. Seeing his pale face, I could tell he grasped the severity of his oversight. He asked in a shaky voice, "What should I do then?" I replied with a small smile, "The best course of action would be for the family to purchase the land from us. This would consolidate their ownership of both the house and the land, resolving all current legal ambiguities." I explained further, of course they weren't aware they needed to buy the land when they purchased the house. They will likely seek compensation from you for this unexpected expense, especially since the land is in a prime location and could potentially cost more than they paid for the house itself. This situation placed my husband in a difficult position, but it was a consequence of his decisions. By selling the house without considering the ownership of the land, he had created a complex issue not just for himself but for the innocent family involved. Now, he faced the potential financial repercussions of his actions, which could include compensating the new owners for the additional cost of the land to rectify the situation fully. Despite my husband Raymond's maneuvers, his options were limited and financially perilous. If he chose to give up all his assets, he'd be left with nothing, not a single penny in his name. Alternatively, he could attempt to buy back the house and pay for the land, along with a relocation fee for the family currently living there. This would return both the land and house to his possession, potentially allowing him to sell them once more. However, given the costs involved, especially the relocation fee, it was unlikely he'd come out ahead financially. On top of the financial mess, there was the issue of emotional damages. "Raymond, your actions have caused me significant mental distress," I told him, my voice steady and resolute. "I plan to seek compensation for that. Keep that in mind." Throughout our marriage, Raymond had used me as a stepping stone for his career advancement. Now that I was aware of his manipulations, I was thoroughly disgusted by his previous gestures, which I once thought were acts of love. I intended to file for damages due to the emotional distress this caused. Although proving emotional distress in court could be challenging and the likelihood of winning was uncertain, merely raising the issue was important given his current circumstances. Cornered by his dwindling options, Raymond was visibly shaken. To compound his dismay, my father added fuel to the fire. Despite being retired and no longer a part of the company, my father maintained strong connections. "I've been in touch with my old colleagues," he mentioned with a hint of satisfaction. "They've been quite vocal about their disapproval of how you've treated my daughter." My father's words underscored that Raymond's reputation at his workplace was deteriorating, and his unethical actions were no longer a secret. As we sat across from each other to discuss the terms of the property division and compensation, my demeanor was calm but firm. "Now that you understand the situation, we need to settle the division of property and compensation," I stated, clasping my hands and offering a smile that was far different from any smile I had shown him during our marriage. This one was of someone reclaiming their power. Captivated by my resolve and the reality of his dire financial and social standing, all Raymond could manage was a forced laugh, his eyes brimming with tears. The negotiations that followed were decidedly in my favor. Resigned to his fate, Raymond agreed to the terms, which included paying me alimony. This meeting was not just a negotiation about financial terms, it was a moment of profound realization for Raymond. It highlighted the consequences of his actions and marked the end of his manipulative tactics. With each decision made, I felt a sense of closure and empowerment, finally turning the page on a challenging chapter of my life. We ultimately decided that Raymond would purchase the land where our house was situated, ensuring that the family who had bought our home could live there without legal complications. We explained the situation to them, and thankfully they were understanding and appreciative of our efforts to rectify the matter. In the end, everyone involved found a resolution that worked for them, except for Raymond. The discussions and subsequent decisions left him significantly out of pocket. To make matters worse, the rumors my father had inadvertently set in motion began to take their toll on his company. His colleagues' perception of him changed drastically, and his once promising promotion was indefinitely postponed by upper management due to concerns about his integrity and professionalism. These rumors continued to erode his reputation, eventually leading him to resign from his position. While I could attribute his downfall to karma, it was a stark reminder that gains made through exploitation are precarious and can easily crumble. Meanwhile, I returned to living with my parents and started running a sewing class from their home. It wasn't a bustling enterprise, but it was fulfilling. My classes, attended by neighborhood wives and their children, provided me with a decent income. While I had once dreamed of teaching my children to sew, life had taken a different turn. Now, I found joy in sharing my skills and passion for sewing with others in the community. This new chapter wasn't just about making ends meet, it was about finding contentment and community in sharing what I love, confirming that happiness sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. Today marks a significant milestone in my life as I find myself in the family home, a place teeming with cherished memories and walls that tell stories of the past. My cat, Roy, is here as well, his enthusiasm palpable as he scampers around, infusing the room with a sense of joy that I can't help but share. This house, the heart of my family's legacy, is where my father realized his aspirations, transforming it into a remarkable estate now valued at $6 million. It stands as a testament to his life's work, a legacy he left for me after his passing. Now, in his absence, my husband is keen to claim a share of this inheritance, arguing that it should belong to both of us. However, I am armed with documents that clearly state my sole ownership. My name is Marilyn, 40 years old, and I am deeply immersed in the digital realm thanks to my career at an online bank, a path that echoes the financial principles my parents instilled in me. They taught me the value of money management and the importance of financial responsibility, lessons that guide me to this day. Despite growing up in affluence, my parents ensured I lived a grounded life. My upbringing was not marked by lavishness. My allowance was modest, our meals were simple, and my education was in a public school, contrary to what one might expect from someone of my financial standing. Yet, rumors of our wealth painted a different picture, leading many to believe my life was a parade of luxury and leisure. "Marilyn, with your grand house and wealth, life must be a breeze, right? You must have all the latest gadgets and games. Can we come over and play?" were common queries from peers who envisioned a life for me that was far from reality. I didn't possess the latest toys or gaming consoles, yet the assumption was otherwise, and it seemed like many wanted to befriend me for the perceived perks of my lifestyle. Today, as I stand in this house surrounded by both the tangible and intangible pieces of my heritage, I am reminded of the true richness of my life, rooted not in material wealth, but in the values and memories that shape who I am. Coming from a family with financial means, I often found myself in uncomfortable situations where friends and acquaintances would ask me for money. It made me uneasy as I felt it contradicted the values of self-reliance and discretion that my parents had instilled in me. This discomfort escalated when I found myself in a dilemma after accidentally breaking Emma's gaming console. At the time, I had no money to replace it, which worsened the situation. Around the same period, Barbara, a new classmate, became a part of my life. She inquired whether I had informed my parents about the incident with the console, but fear of disappointing them kept me silent. "I can't tell them. They might get upset," I confessed to Barbara, hoping for her understanding. Regrettably, when she asked me for financial help, I had to decline due to my parents' strict rule against lending money. Apologizing to Barbara was hard, and it made our school interactions awkward. Things took a turn for the worse when Barbara tearfully reacted to my refusal, and soon enough, rumors started circulating that I was unwilling to help a friend despite my family's wealth. Attempts to clarify that I had no spare money were futile. Emma then made a hurtful comment implying that I valued money over friendship. The situation deteriorated further when Emma and Barbara began spreading falsehoods that I owed them money and were refusing to compensate for the broken console. The school eventually intervened and learned the truth, reprimanding Emma and Barbara. However, the rumors continued to spiral, eventually reaching my parents. My father stepped in, arranging a meeting with both families. Despite their apologies, the damage to our relationship was irreparable, and I chose to distance myself from Emma and Barbara. Despite this resolution, I still had to endure their cold stares and whispered comments. The whole ordeal was a painful lesson in trust and the complexities of friendship when mixed with money. That evening at dinner, my dad offered some advice that has resonated with me over the years. He emphasized the importance of being firm in our decisions, especially when it comes to financial matters. "Marilyn, it's perfectly fine to say no," he advised, his tone warm and reassuring. He also suggested a practical approach for handling persistent inquiries about money. If someone keeps asking, just tell them you need to check with your parents, even if you already know you can't lend the money. This wisdom on managing money issues with grace and assertiveness became a cornerstone of my growth. As I matured, I became more selective about the people I allowed into my inner circle, prioritizing character over financial considerations. Post-university, I was keen to keep my professional and personal lives distinct to avoid financial entanglements. These experiences underscored the value of setting clear boundaries in friendships and finances alike, shaping the person I became. By the time I was 32, I met Scott through a mutual friend. Despite our age difference, his authenticity and warmth were immediately appealing, and what started as casual dating soon blossomed into a serious relationship. 3 years later, we celebrated our union with a beautiful wedding, much to my parents' delight. About a month into our marriage, my father suggested inviting Scott over to our place. I had some reservations. Scott was a talkative person, and I feared he might unwittingly divulge sensitive family information. Nevertheless, Feeling more secure in our relationship, I decided it was time to introduce him more fully to my family's world. During the visit, Scott was visibly impressed by my family's home, revealing that he hadn't fully grasped the extent of our wealth. While the visit itself went smoothly, Scott's relentless questions about our financial status during our drive home made me uncomfortable, particularly because I wasn't very familiar with the specifics of our family finances myself. A few months later, the situation took a dramatic turn when my mother called to inform me that my father had been hospitalized, an event that came as a shock and added another layer of complexity to our lives. It was a shock to discover that my dad was unwell, especially since I hadn't been aware of any health issues. Reflecting on our last meeting, I remembered noticing that he seemed under the weather, and now guilt and worry overwhelmed me. When my mom and I visited him in the hospital that Saturday, despite his efforts to stay upbeat, it was clear he was struggling. He even apologized for what he felt was a burden on us, which was just so typical of his kind-hearted nature. The doctor's news that he had advanced pancreatic cancer, which had spread too far for surgery, hit us hard. It was hard to grasp how someone as health-conscious as my dad could fall so ill. Throughout his diagnosis, he remained strong, focusing on our happiness rather than his suffering, which brought tears to all of our eyes. Due to hospital regulations, only immediate family could visit, which saddened him as he hoped to create more happy memories with friends at home. This reminded us all of the vibrant life he had envisioned for us. I promised him that I would keep our home a place of joy, even in his absence. This promise became a cornerstone of how I coped with the situation. To honor my dad, I decided to renovate our family home, giving me something positive to focus on during such a difficult period. Scott, always so caring, expressed concern about the extent of my involvement, unaware of the additional challenges I was facing, like issues with our family estate that I had yet to disclose to him. When Scott inquired about my dad's condition, I finally opened up about all the difficulties we were facing. It was a relief to share the burden as I juggled work, hospital visits, and the flood of emotions that came with them. However, tension arose when Scott began to question the financial implications of my dad's illness and the status of the family estate. He even suggested we seek legal advice to prepare for any eventuality concerning my mom, which stirred up painful memories for me. My dad had always had a trusted lawyer, and the thought of diving into legalities at such a time felt incredibly raw and complicated. Scott's cautious approach to finances began to create tension in our relationship. This tension escalated a few months later when my father sadly passed away after a valiant fight against his illness. As we navigated the challenging period that followed, discussions about inheritance began to emerge within my family. I inherited a substantial property, a mansion valued at $6 million, which only heightened Scott's curiosity and involvement. Despite my efforts to keep him at a distance from these discussions, his excitement about moving into the mansion and his persistent questions about financial details took me by surprise. I later discovered that he had spoken to my cousin at the funeral, who had offhandedly mentioned that it would be a waste for such a grand house to remain unoccupied. This remark only complicated matters further. Despite my attempts to make it clear to Scott that the inheritance was mine and not something to be shared, he seemed unwilling or unable to accept this. Our relationship grew increasingly strained. At my father's funeral, Scott was present but disengaged, not assisting with the memorial services or the subsequent legal matters. As we tried to settle back into daily life, Scott shocked me by claiming he had changed the ownership of the family home into his name, presenting legal documents as proof. This betrayal was not only a profound breach of trust, but also a clear disregard for the respect and boundaries within our relationship. Dealing with these inheritance issues exposed deeper problems in our marriage, forcing us to reevaluate our values, the trust between us, and the direction of our relationship. When Scott bluntly suggested that we could continue living as roommates in the house without much financial support from him, and even threatened divorce if I disagreed, I was devastated. The magnitude of his actions and proposals was overwhelming. I pleaded with him to reconsider what he was doing, hoping he would see the emotional and relational turmoil his actions had caused. When Scott made the unilateral decision to change the ownership of our family home without my consent, he claimed he had consulted a lawyer. This revelation escalated our issues to the point where divorce seemed inevitable. I felt utterly betrayed and isolated, compelled to distance myself from the life and home I had shared with Scott. I couldn't fathom why Scott would take such drastic measures. It seemed that his perspective on money had shifted dramatically, impacting his action and our relationship negatively. The situation worsened the next day when Scott demanded the house keys, claiming ownership. His attempt to enter the house was thwarted by security, whom I provided with the legitimate ownership documents that affirm the house was indeed mine, a gift from my father. Upon seeing the proof, Scott was taken aback. He had entrusted a man named Frank to handle the legalities of changing the ownership and had paid him $410,000. Unfortunately, it turned out to be a scam. Frank was nowhere to be found, ignoring all of Scott's attempts to contact him. Scott's frustration soon turned towards me. He accused me of overspending and questioned my understanding of inheritance laws. Despite Scott's attempts to mend our relationship and his suggestions to give our marriage another shot, the trust we once shared was irreparably damaged. I had to ask the security guard to escort him off the property, marking the end of a painful chapter in my life. In the months that followed, I had ample time to reflect on everything that had transpired. This period of introspection helped me understand just how crucial trust and honesty are in a relationship. The ordeal with Scott, filled with deceit and betrayal, taught me to guard against letting financial matters cloud my judgment. During the first memorial service for my dad at our family temple, Scott made an unexpected appearance. Since our divorce, his life had taken a downward turn. He was unemployed and facing financial difficulties. This encounter was a stark reminder of how drastically our lives had diverged since the split. Seeing Scott at my dad's memorial service brought a mix of emotions. The people he had trusted had clearly failed him, and he stood there looking visibly distressed and out of place during such a solemn event. His attempt to apologize, though tearful, unintentionally caused a stir among my relatives. Despite his emotional state, I found it necessary to ask him to leave, and security had to intervene to ensure it was done. This was not only a difficult moment, but also a turning point for me, reinforcing my desire to move forward and leave our shared past behind. I decided it was time to move out of my parents' home, a decision I had been considering for some time. I found a new place to live, severing ties with Scott completely. Meanwhile, Scott continued to visit the property, which my mom and I had transformed into a rental villa. This new venture allowed us to turn a family property into a source of joy and retreat for many visitors. On his part, Scott appeared to be making positive strides. He secured a new job and seemed dedicated to starting anew. Transforming our family home into a rental villa not only fulfilled my dad's vision, but also created a warm and inviting space for guests from various backgrounds. Known for its stunning views and beautiful garden, the villa quickly gained popularity. We hosted a range of events from intimate weddings to large family gatherings. Working alongside my mom on this project brought us closer and filled us with joy. As the villa's success grew, we decided to enhance it further. We added a swimming pool, a cozy outdoor lounge, and a playful area for children. Each new addition made the villa even more appealing, turning it into a beloved destination for relaxation and celebration, symbolizing a new chapter of growth and happiness for us. Our dedication to ensuring that our guests had a fantastic experience at the villa paid off, as it quickly became a favored destination for those seeking a peaceful retreat and memorable experiences. This project was more than just a business venture. It was about fulfilling my father's dream and creating cherished memories for everyone who visited. Taking care of the villa's garden brought me immense joy and satisfaction. Transforming our family home into a vibrant place where people could gather, have fun, and create lasting memories filled me with pride. I could almost sense my father's pride looking down on us, seeing his vision come to life. This venture not only realized his dream, but also provided us with financial stability and a newfound sense of freedom. Throughout this journey, I learned valuable lessons about trust, finance, and the strength required to carve out my path, independent of past challenges. This process of self-discovery taught me that facing difficulties can strengthen and motivate one. From friends, I heard updates about Scott, who seemed to be turning his life around by finding meaningful employment and learning from his past errors. Knowing that he was also making positive changes brought me a sense of calm, realizing that both of us were advancing and maturing in our ways. My father's vision became a catalyst for growth, not just for my mom and me, but for every guest who visited the villa. It turned into a hub of joy and celebration, a sanctuary where people could forge lasting memories. The success of the villa stands as a tribute to my father's vision, embodying the values of resilience and diligent work. Through this endeavor, we've created much more than just a place to stay. The villa has become a beacon of happiness, a place for crafting memories, and a testament to the idea that dreaming big and working hard can lead to remarkable outcomes. After my father's passing, as we gathered to mourn, discussions about his assets and inheritance quickly took center stage. My brother-in-law, married to my elder sister, Amy, boldly claimed that she should inherit everything, including $12 million. While they celebrated prematurely, the lawyer intervened, stating that such decisions were not theirs to make. I am Benjamin, a 39-year-old sales professional, married with 2 children. My father was a significant shareholder in a company and continued to work despite his age. Amy, always the problematic sibling, had a tumultuous past with our parents due to her erratic behavior. Despite reaching her 50s, she lacked a stable job and lived life on her whims. Her impulsive nature peaked when she married Peter, a younger and quite indolent man, and recklessly spent the money our father provided for their wedding. Her assumption was that she would eventually inherit all, leading her to make continual financial demands. The demise of our father was a severe blow. He suffered a heart attack while golfing. I took the responsibility of arranging his funeral as Amy was absent, indulging in her usual escapades. The subsequent day, a lawyer arrived to discuss the will, and Amy and Peter audaciously declared that everything should go to her. Their claim was met with disbelief and ultimately a shocking revelation from the lawyer. Amy was not our father's biological daughter and had never been legally adopted, despite her beliefs. This news struck Amy hard, sparking a confrontation with our mother about her biological origins and adoption status. The turmoil escalated as legal nuances were discussed, and it became clear that Amy, though older, was not entitled to the presumed inheritance. Peter's demeanor shifted as he realized the financial windfall he expected was not forthcoming. This led to an aggressive outburst, further revealing the opportunistic nature of their relationship. As the inheritance proceedings progressed, it became evident that Amy's entitlement was misplaced. The subsequent months were tumultuous, marked by disputes and Amy's blatant manipulation for financial gain, which only ceased when the legal stipulations of the will were firmly enforced. Our mother's health deteriorated amidst these family conflicts, leading to her passing. The grief was compounded by the discovery of theft by Amy and Peter, who had stripped the family home of valuables in their desperate quest for wealth. The aftermath was a blend of sorrow and resolve as I navigated the complex emotional and legal landscape left in the wake of my parents' departures, determined to uphold their legacy and protect the integrity of our family. During the aftermath of my father's funeral, the house was still resonating with murmurs about his legacy, when suddenly my sister and her husband barged in, utterly unaware of the finer details, and declared shockingly that all of Dad's stocks and a hefty $12 million inheritance were supposed to go to Amy, the eldest. "We did it, Amy. Now we're set for life," her husband exclaimed, jubilantly celebrating their premature victory. Everyone was stunned, including the lawyer who intervened with a firm, "Hold on a minute," as my sister shot him a defiant look. The lawyer, with a grave tone, informed them, "Amy, you're not entitled to any inheritance." The room fell silent as my sister and her husband looked on in disbelief, insisting that couldn't be possible since Amy, being the oldest daughter, should inherit everything. It seemed my brother-in-law had been counting on this inheritance, but his plans were abruptly disrupted when the lawyer gently revealed a family secret. "Did you not know Amy is not Mr. Benjamin's biological child?" My sister's complexion went pale, her eyes darting in panic towards our mother, who bore a complicated expression. I had always known Amy was a half-sibling, but she had been oblivious to this fact. Overwhelmed, she confronted our mother. "What does this mean?" In a low, troubled voice, our mother confessed, "Amy, you're from my previous marriage." This revelation stunned my sister, who had often flaunted her status as the favored child. As she reeled from the shock, her husband quickly interjected, trying to salvage the situation, "But she must still have rights to the inheritance since she was legally adopted, right?" Amy echoed his sentiment, but our mother had to clarify once more, shaking her head. There was no legal adoption. This left them both incredulous, as my sister protested, "But I'm the oldest daughter. Dad even acknowledged that." Her frustration turned towards me as she accused, "You're going to take everything, aren't you?" Annoyed by her sense of entitlement despite the countless support our father had provided, I retorted, "After all the help Dad gave you and you still talk like this? Be reasonable." The argument escalated as they insisted there was nothing wrong with a father supporting his daughter. I felt the heavy burden of the situation, realizing that despite the normalcy of parental support, my sister had exploited our father's generosity for her debts and mishaps. In a bid to diffuse the tension, I suggested, "Why don't we just show Amy the will?" Her panic was evident as she realized she hadn't paid attention when Dad had discussed his will, intended for all of us to review together, a meeting she had dismissed to pursue her interests. As the reality of the situation dawned on her, her husband glared at her for her oversight, highlighting the importance of what she had neglected. When my father discussed his will, my sister chose to ignore it, preferring to spend her time elsewhere. This came to light when I mentioned her absence during those critical discussions, leading her husband to scold her sharply, emphasizing the importance of what she had missed. Reluctantly, they decided to listen to the lawyer, who then unveiled the will. It explicitly stated that the inheritance was designated for me and my mother. The will also clarified why my father had hesitated to adopt my sister. He had planned to, but became increasingly disheartened by her dismissive attitude towards me, her reckless financial habits, and her general irresponsibility as she aged. Realizing she was not entitled to the inheritance, my sister was visibly shocked. In a heated moment, her husband accused her of misleading him about her financial status, his frustration evident as he realized the fortune he anticipated was non-existent. His anger escalated quickly, and he demanded that my sister not return until she had secured some money for them. Confused and disappointed, he stormed out, leaving everyone in a state of dismay. My sister, overwhelmed by anger and frustration, turned to our mother and tearfully questioned why she hadn't been legally adopted, arguing that it was unfair she wasn't getting anything from the inheritance. Her emotional outburst startled me, but the lawyer remained composed and accustomed to handling such intense family dramas. "Why does he get everything? Because I'm Dad's son," I explained, which only fueled her fury more. She accused me of ruining her life, suggesting things might have been better if I hadn't been born. Before I could respond, the lawyer intervened, warning her that her aggressive behavior could lead to legal consequences, a reminder that made her momentarily recall her past misdemeanors. Despite the tumultuous revelation and the initial chaos it caused, the following 8 months saw the inheritance proceedings handled smoothly, thanks to the lawyer's meticulous management. My sister and her husband occasionally expressed their discontent, but they had little room to interfere. During this period, my mother, out of compassion, gave my sister some financial support, despite the strain between them. I chose to stay silent about my sister's actions, even though they greatly troubled me. She and her husband's abrupt disappearance with the funds demonstrated their blatant greed, leaving our relatives dismayed by their behavior. One afternoon, I took my mother, wife, and daughter out for lunch, a suggestion from my wife that seemed to lift my mother's spirits as she enjoyed time with her granddaughter. During our meal, I gently proposed, "Hey Mom, why don't you come live with us?" However, I cautioned her about the possibility of my sister Amy visiting only when in need of money. My mother hesitated, understandably wary given Amy's unpredictable nature and the potential trouble she could bring to a peaceful household. I asked her to consider the idea as we drove back, approaching the seemingly vacant family home, only to see lights unexpectedly on. "Let's pop in for a quick coffee," I suggested, suspecting Amy might be inside. As we neared the entrance, a car abruptly swerved towards us, narrowly missing but sending me flying into a flower bed. The shock of the near miss was palpable as my wife and daughter rushed to my aid, while my mother stood by, visibly shaken. The driver turned out to be Peter, my brother-in-law, who later claimed to the police that he had confused the accelerator with the brake, a story I found hard to believe. Recovering in the hospital, I was visited by my sister, who coldly remarked on my resilience. Her comment hinted at a darker wish behind the accident, suggesting she might have hoped for a more tragic outcome that could favor her financially. With a smirk, I retorted, "Too bad for you," noticing her discomfort at the thought. I revealed to her that our mother had decided to waive her inheritance in favor of my family, rendering any plots surrounding the accident pointless. The idea that someone might decline what they could rightfully claim seemed utterly foreign to her. As we discussed, I informed her that I had already drafted a will, following our father's example, ensuring my assets would secure the future of my wife and children. My sister, overwhelmed by the news, pleaded, "Can't you at least give me some? There's $12 million, right?" Her desperation was evident as she trembled, grappling with the realization that the financial security she coveted was slipping away. When I steadfastly denied my sister's demand for half of the inheritance, her expression twisted into one of fury as she reached out and grabbed my collar. "Give me half! I'm your sister!" she screamed, her voice tinged with a disturbing desperation, possibly driven to the edge by her financial desires. I looked at her with sadness, knowing how deeply our father would have been disappointed by her greed. Her anger escalated to a dangerous level as she lunged for my throat. "Amy, what are you doing?" my mother exclaimed, her voice filled with concern, just as the nurses hurried over to prevent any further escalation and escort my sister out of the room. Despite her instinct to protect Amy, it was evident that my sister had also lashed out at her. Heartbroken, my mother lamented, "Where did I go wrong in raising her?" It was a sorrowful moment, hearing the pain in her words. Shortly thereafter, my mother's health took a turn for the worse. As she became increasingly frail, my wife and I took on more responsibilities, helping with transportation and household chores. This seemed to irk my sister, particularly as she saw my wife's involvement during her visits to ask for money. Unexpectedly, my sister declared that she and her husband would take over caring for our mother, abruptly informing us that our help was no longer needed. Despite my attempts to discuss the matter, she hung up, leaving me worried about her inexperience and her husband's dubious care capabilities. My concerns were justified when within a month, an ambulance rushed my mother to the hospital due to a medication error, an error she had never made before. The home was in disarray, the fridge empty, the hired help dismissed, and significant sums of money missing from her bank account. Though, thankfully, the inheritance remained secured in a safe deposit box. The situation was dire, and as I collected necessities for her hospital stay, my mother confessed that my brother-in-law had been the one managing her medication. Realizing the gravity of the situation, I suggested, "Mom, perhaps it's best not to let Amy into the house anymore." Her reply, filled with weariness, struck a deep chord. "Benjamin, I promise to take care of you, but the house is in such disarray, and you've lost so much weight. Have you been eating properly?" Concerned for her well-being, I proposed that she move in with us, where we could ensure her care together. Overwhelmed, she broke down in tears. Despite all efforts to stabilize her condition, her health continued to decline, perhaps worsened by the stress of the familial conflicts. She never fully recovered, passing away in a manner that painfully echoed my father's departure. After her passing, as I returned to the family home to arrange her funeral, I discovered that all valuables were gone, likely taken by my sister and her husband in their desperate quest for wealth. Standing in the hollow silence of the empty house, I felt a surge of resolve to hold them accountable. The next day, as I was due to meet with the lawyer alongside my sister, presumably to discuss the inheritance, she audaciously claimed, "Mom's inheritance rightfully belongs to me, her daughter." Faced with her continued entitlement and deceit, I prepared to confront the situation head-on, determined to protect my parents' legacy and seek justice for their memory. As my sister boldly claimed her right to the inheritance, I couldn't help but let out a chuckle at her grave misunderstanding. "Let's see what the will says," I suggested, prompting the lawyer to reveal its contents. As he did, my sister's face turned pale, her expectations shattered. "No, this can't be. Amy is not entitled to inherit anything. That was Dad's final wish," the lawyer clarified firmly. Her husband, unable to contain his frustration, exploded in anger, sweeping items off the table. "This is absurd. Amy is that old woman's biological child," he yelled, demanding the inheritance. I confronted him. "Peter, did you try to harm my mom?" He returned a sharp glare. "I never did such a thing," he retorted. "Why was there a mistake with her medication?" I pressed on, seeking the truth behind his dubious care. With a scowl, he dismissively replied, "Who cares about that, Benjamin? It's outrageous that we're not getting any inheritance." My sister lost her composure and snapped, "What have you done?" It became clear she hadn't been attentive to our mother's health, but was rather fixated on the inheritance to solve her financial problems. "Tell me this isn't true. I'm getting nothing," she demanded. The lawyer, maintaining his composure, explained the legal distribution of the inheritance. After accounting for the funds my sister had prematurely withdrawn and the items she had sold, there was hardly anything left. Frustrated, she muttered, "That can't be it. It can't be this little." Her lack of touch with the realities of work and reliance on our parents were apparent. As she faced the reality of her actions, I confronted her, unable to hide my disdain. "Mom thought you would take care of her, but you just took her money and left her on her own. You're ungrateful," I said, anger coloring my words. "What are you talking about?" she retorted defensively. "Then show me the detailed expenses you used for Mom's living costs. I'll cover what's necessary," I challenged, extending my hand for proof. Her face paled, her lips trembling. "I don't have that. Without receipts, it won't be recognized," she stammered, finding herself at a loss for words as the lawyer emphasized the need for documentation. Her husband, attempting to appeal to my sympathy, pleaded, "Benjamin, your sister really needs help? Can't you lend her a hand, even just a little?" I remained firm, my frustration at their entitlement growing. He muttered under his breath, reflecting on what might have been. If everything had gone as planned, Amy would have had the entire inheritance by now. "What do you mean by that?" I questioned sharply, looking for the hidden implications in his words, ready to uncover the full extent of their schemes. Before I could press him further, my brother-in-law inadvertently made a revealing comment. "Because of this guy, nothing ever goes smoothly. I was supposed to get a new car, but all I ended up with was barely enough for repairs." My sister quickly tried to cut in, realizing the gravity of his words, but it was already too late. "That's a serious accusation. It sounds like fraud," the lawyer pointed out, a wry smile appearing as she glanced at the troubled couple. "That's illegal. I clearly stated at the beginning of this meeting that it would be recorded, and you both agreed to it," she reminded them. Realizing his blunder, my brother-in-law paled. Turning to him, I declared resolutely, "Peter, I'll be pressing charges for that accident." "Don't be absurd. There's no evidence," he retorted hastily. "You've just provided the evidence yourself," I countered sharply. Overwhelmed by the situation, my sister broke down in tears, berating him. "You fool! It's all your fault. What are we going to do now?" Eventually, my brother-in-law faced criminal charges as his prior offenses came to light, leading to his detention by the police. My sister, implicated as an accomplice, received a lesser sentence. Struggling financially and unable to afford her rent, she sought assistance from relatives but found herself rejected by everyone. As for me, I continued to focus on my career, diligently working without depending on any inheritance. I found comfort in the dividends from stocks, which served as a small but satisfying pleasure, a reminder of the rewards of honest labor and prudent investment.